Welcome members, invited guests and the public, both here and watching on webcast, to today's meeting of the Planning Committee. The main item today is a discussion with invited guests on mayoral planning decision powers. Members of the public can follow the meeting on the webcast and on Twitter using #AssemblyPlanning. Please may I remind members, guests and audience to turn your phones off or put them on silent. I'd first like to ask the clerk if there are any apologies have been received for this meeting.
Apologies for absence have been received from Assemblymember Copley.
Thank you. And can I ask members to note the list of offices on the report and ask if there are any additional interests to declare? Thank you. To our invited guests, actually this is something I'm not usually used to our invited guests, do you have any interest to declare which are relevant to the business of this meeting?
I don't believe so.
There is an indication at the back.
So I was involved in 2 cases.
Thank you very much. That's going to be noted?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Of course. That's why we're here.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That probably doesn't need to be declared because you'll be declaring it later on. Thank you. On item 3, and can we note the committee's membership, terms of reference, and standing delegations?
Yes.
That's issue 5
Yes,
as
noted.
well. On the minutes, on item 6, the minutes of the meeting, can we agree the minutes from our previous meeting held on the 25th of April 2019? Item 7, our summary list of actions. Can I ask members to note the outstanding actions arising from previous meetings?
Yep.
Thank you very much. And now that moves us to the main item of the day, item 8, the mayoral planning decisions and powers. First of all, can I welcome our guests? You'll be in 2 tranches. For the first half hour, we've got Jules Pipe, CDE, who's the Deputy Mayor for Planning, and Juliemma McLoughlin, who's the Assistant Director for Planning at the GLA. Did I get that right? In both cases? That's very good, yes. I live in fear of getting titles wrong. Shall I read out the other guests now? Yeah, we'll wait until this section is over. So, let me launch with the first question, if I may. Obviously, we're interested in whether or not the system is working, and we're very, may I say that we had a briefing from yourself, from Juliemma McLoughlin, just the other day about the process. But to Jules Pike, could I ask that the last review of the protocols for conducting representation hearings took place by Mayor Johnson in February 2016. Following the 11 hearings that have now taken place under Mayor Khan, have there been any lessons learned in terms of revising the protocol?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, the process that is undertaken at City Hall for call-ins does mirror very much borough procedures. So I think that I'd have to either think that somehow that there was a reason for departing from borough procedures, which I have to confess that nothing has occurred to me, or whether both borough procedures and the City Hall procedures are both in need of updating. Certainly, and I think that probably to that I probably would say yes, there are improvements I think that could be made to the system. I mean, I think there are major improvements down the line that are coming forward through implementation of tech. I think both local and City Hall processes will be improved by the availability of 3D imaging of applications. I think perhaps this is more local than City Hall, but both will benefit from e-notification to people about to residents about applications, and the impending, subject to 2/3 of the boroughs agreeing, the impending introduction of the automation of the London Development Database, I think will revolutionise sort of it will certainly enable far better e-notification than would be capable than we would be capable of now. Any borough would be capable of now. So I think that there are plenty of improvements to be made, both in people's appreciation and understanding of schemes through 3D imaging and their awareness of schemes. But as far as specific call-in goes, if I was to think of things that could change that were in response to suggestions or complaints that have been made in the process, there's only been one thing, and that is that on 2 occasions we have been asked to extend the consultation because it fell over a particular period, a holiday period, and in both cases we acceded to those requests, and the consultation time was extended. So, as I say, without any member of the public or anyone else making further suggestions to me, I'm not really on the front foot of sort of suggesting other changes than I've already outlined. I mean, on the two cases, one was the Newcombe House case in Kensington, Chelsea, and that was summer holidays, and we increased the consultation by 20 days, going to 51 days in total. And then the other one was...
I think that was the Beam Park one.
Yes, I think it was the Beam.
Yeah, and that was, we extended the time period on that one.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't got the number of days for that, but we extended that one as well.
So you mentioned the fact that we've got tech coming into play here, and hopefully there's going to be more application of tech in allowing
greater knowledge and engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that's going to result in a change, however, in a change in the deadlines for consultation, in terms of the procedure for consultation as well, or the protocols that you adopt for calling in and determining applications?
Well, I think there are a couple of things there. One would be, again, I come back to my point about what applies here and what applies to local boroughs in handling these things. But also here, of course, it's bound within underneath the 2008 Act and the guidelines that followed from that in 2009. But I imagine that what you're proposing is to perhaps make representations to government to make suggestions for changes. I mean, I'd have to pass to Juliemma, because I think we're probably treading on ground there that is really the realms of the length of time officers have to do the job that they have to do at the various stages, rather than something at which the mayor kind of deals with the issue, or myself.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, and if I honestly answer, I don't know the impact of tech on how it really transforms the way we communicate. It will have to be a collaborative process with the government, because it is the 1990 Act that sets the statutory time periods that bind us, bind local authorities, and that is the thing that I think, if you were dialing tech into that, I don't think any of us yet know just how that would change those time frames. So I think it is a watch this space. But it's certainly, if there are things that we can do when we are more tech ready in about 12 months, we would be certainly looking to be at the front foot and the cutting edge of how we are far more transparent and engaging with Londoners, in the same way we were over the London plan, increasing the number of correspondents there from 400 to over 4,000. So, when we say we want people to talk to us, we do really mean it. So, we'll be finding ways to dial in that tech as soon as we can.
Thank you. Assemblyman Shah.
Thank you. Jules, during the call-in process, the planning applications can change significantly. There can be material change which sometimes may bear little or no resemblance to the original application. And also in normal circumstances when applications are called in, what could you do more to ensure that community members are properly consulted, for example, by compelling developers to hold public exhibitions, or from GLA or Mayor's office, greater awareness about the complete change in the application during this process?
I mean, we certainly encourage applicants, the developers, to hold further sort of public drop-in sessions, and if a new model, if there are radical changes. I mean, we can't compel them, but we certainly encourage them. We certainly don't have the resources here to run that level of engagement, but we do run a full consultation period in the run up to the hearing, as I've outlined, which obviously include any of the revised changes. I would query as to quite how significant changes have been, though. I mean, there's one or two where they were significant, but looking at the 10 or so, I mean, yes, sometimes there are one or two additional stories on a building. The radical, obviously, Bishopsgate's Goods Yard will be a significant change. There've been sorry, and the Greenwich scheme. I would say those are the two. The VIP trading estate at Greenwich was a significant change, but they did do in that instance. They did do a significant.
We did our own engagement with.
I think that actually brings me to a request which I was going to make after my questioning, and that is that I noticed that in terms of called-in applications under the current mayor, there are 11 applications which are listed, and then 2 which are pending decisions, which is Bishopgate and Pentavia Retail Park. Can you give us kind of, for each of the application, what the original application were, and then how they changed during the call-in process? That will give us sort of application by application how the original applications were changed, and the level of changes or the scale of changes. I think that would certainly help our scrutiny considerably.
Yes, I mean
that can be provided.
Yes, I mean, for all the others, it's quite easy to list them. Actually, even now, about the specific number of units and the additional stories. But as I say, that's quite minor. For those 2 particular cases, Bishopsgate, Goods Yard, and Greenwich scheme. No, Greenwich scheme.
Yeah.
We could, outside of this meeting, we could supply the changes.
I can see why you may not be able to compel the developers to consult, hold exhibitions, whatever. But certainly, you can put in a strong word.
Absolutely.
And indeed, borough councils can also play a part in it, because they are engaged right from the application stage with developers, with applicants, for statutory and going beyond that consultation with not only, generally objectors, but indeed amenity societies and the neighbouring communities. Surely, at calling stage as well, somehow we got to a stage where we are completely transparent in terms of process, and the communities actually know what the changes are, because it may be 1 or 2 stories. We may consider it insignificant, but it is a material change, and the community, the stakeholders need to know what is being done and what access they have. Developers know, applicants know what access they have to the authorities, but certainly your community doesn't know what powers they have, what access they have to the GLA team to put forward their views and be clear that you got that everyone's kind of opinion as to what what they think about the application during that process.
I mean, perhaps Juliemma might want to comment on some of the detail there about the opportunities when for the public to be engaged that kind of second time around. But as I say, those two examples, just for me to be clear, those two examples were the ones where there were radical changes, and in both those occasions, obviously with the GLA's encouragement, I can't speak for whether they would have done it without that encouragement, but on both those occasions, Bishopsgate Goods Yard had public drop-in sessions, new model. There was a lot of consultation because they had a lot of ground to make up, frankly, to get any level of public support for the new proposal, considering how it had happened before, how it went 3 or 4 years ago. So there was a lot of engagement there, model and everything. And the second one, the Greenwich scheme, the trading estate, again, there was public exhibitions of the revised model, wasn't there?
Yeah, and there was, and we ourselves, the GLA planning team, had several meetings with local residents. In terms of going back to the original point...
I'm sorry, Juliemma, just sorry for butting in. And that is because they were...
They asked for them.
And also, but they were at the more kind of extreme end of things. I think you would be hard-pressed to have done it for all 11 throughout the year.
No, we wouldn't have done. When it's minor, and that's why it goes back to how I'll answer your process question. So when an application is recovered, all of the people who've made any representations, amenity groups, councillors, any individual, all of that correspondence comes to us from the borough. So we're aware of all of the people who've registered an interest, and we communicate with them directly to say, this is when we will be calling in a scheme, this is where you can view the scheme, this is who you write to, this is the case officer, and we give them all the timeline mapped out so they have as much chance as possible to write to us with their views on any amendments we make. And if they want us to go out to talk to the amenity societies and groups and we can accommodate that wish, we do so.
You make them aware of this,
all the changes, yes.
Not only all the changes, but that they are able to actually meet the team.
Yes, those
to discuss.
That people are aware of that. When a process begins, that's exactly what we do.
Assembly Member Gavron.
Yeah, just Jules. The boroughs often, you're calling it in, and the boroughs are minded to refuse if they haven't already refused. I think about that right. And often it could be on needing more social housing, but it could also be on other issues like design and so on. And I'm thinking about just Newcomb House, for instance, and the recent one, the Forum, where both those applications are going straight into the pavement. I mean, the height, the new build, is going straight into the pavement and not set back, as they have been. And we know from looking around European cities, just been to listen to Melbourne, talking about their practices, that setting back tall buildings so that you can have a proper street scene, and you don't have all the downward pressures of wind, you don't have the sunlight issues and so on, and you don't have that oppression, and you have wider pavements and all that. Do you often not think that you'd like to actually ask the applicants to put in a new application?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack in that.
Can I just say that you've got 2 more questions to come and 12
Well,
minutes.
Okay, then.
I'm just
So,
thinking,
and pick as quick as you
Okay,
can.
well,
the point is often these, they actually need new applications rather than tinkering about with them.
I mean, on your first point, this mayor hasn't taken over anything on the indication that it would be refused, nor for non-determination. They have actually reached stage 2, and then we've obviously one's lying on the books, undetermined. That was Bishopsgate Goods Yard, but all the rest have actually been through committee locally. On the issue of Newcomb House, I mean, yes, obviously, generally, starting with a blank sheet of paper, it would be desirable often to get more good design details into a building, but you've got to take context into account. That particular location of Newcomb House, which is practically above Notting Hill Gate.
Jules, I don't want to get in the detail.
But yeah,
the principle of maybe you've got all this power to say, look, these are our criteria. Go away and do a new application.
But it's a well, as I say, I mean, in that instance, I don't think it would have been practical to ask them to move it back from the edge of the pavement. That's not the context of the rest of that street. Actually, what they had delivered, what they proposed to deliver there, eventually, actually was a very good scheme with really good public realm within the scheme that was sheltered from all the hustle and bustle and narrow pavement that exists in that location, because it is a very busy road there. I think what was interesting with that case, and it's kind of personal to kind of you know the questioning about why I called it in, that scheme had actually, bar the couple of stories on a back building. The mayor added a couple of stories to a back building there, but other than that, it was essentially the same scheme that had gone to an inspector, and the inspector had dispensed with all matters apart from the lack of affordable housing. So by the time it came to the mayor, you know, there was really the affordable housing to determine. So I don't think there would be...
I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I plucked it out of the air because it does come down to the pavement. I'm just trying to think of examples where you might say, look, come back. I mean, that's one detail, but come back with a new scheme.
Well, I mean, certainly that happened in Bishopsgate Goods Yard, that it simply didn't get determined, and then the planning authority and this mayor said to them that wouldn't be acceptable. We wouldn't be taking that scheme forward with a few tweaks. It had to be a radical change, not just because of the daylight sunlight, but for many, many reasons, and not least the lack of affordable housing. And it has significantly changed.
And certainly the way the legislation works, and I don't want to tell you how to suck eggs, Nicky, but the legislation says you consider the matter before you. So if we said go away and come up with another application, you would be either agreeing with the borough's recommendation to either leave things alone or let it proceed, and therefore the two-tier system that London operates wouldn't exist, because you would just send things back to the borough time and time again, rather than the mayor interfering on the strategic matters that are of importance to him. And we do bring in the mayoral design advocates on call-ins to make sure they're of the highest quality.
And I was saying, I think those two applications are at the kind of the more radical end in the sense of what we would tolerate here. I think our preference would be normally, and I think that's shown in the statistics, that normally any major departure, we would want to see them to go around the borough again. Because Juliemma's department is not there to do the heavy lifting for schemes from scratch. That should be done locally at the borough.
Thank you. We're going to have to move on to the next question. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mine I think have been partly answered, so I'll ask them very quickly. You can say they've been partly answered anyway. What is the Mayor's view on the applicant's ability to request the Mayor to call on an application, as was the case with Mount Pleasant and Bishopsgate Goods Yard? And because of time, I'll also give you the second one. Does this bypass the democratic process and allow an applicant an advantage to avoid local scrutiny?
Well, I suppose I'd say yes, it does, if it hadn't been considered locally. But in those two, I wouldn't necessarily want to defend either of them. I'm not interested in defending those two actions there particularly, because they're both unsatisfactory outcomes for differing reasons. But both of those aren't examples of no local consideration and local democracy was bypassed, because actually both those schemes were very hotly debated and contested at local level. It's true that Bishopsgate, I don't think, ever actually got to planning committee in Town Hamlets and Hackney, but it was certainly a lot of public debate. So I suppose we're yet to have an example, I believe, where, I mean, obviously not under this mayor, but I don't think it happened under the previous mayor either, where it was quite low-key, nothing got to committee, and then the developers asked for it to come here for non-determination. I would feel uncomfortable if that happened.
Okay, thank you.
When an application is called in, do you continue to work closely with the planning authority? And are they able to input into negotiations between the applicant, the developer, and the mayor? over whatever further amendments that are being negotiated and agreements that may form part of Section 106 or probably SIL as well?
The short answer is yes. I mean, our preference is that the boroughs are involved right from the start all the way to the end in referable applications. We encourage all applications that would be referable to come in for a pre-application discussion with officers here, and our preference is that boroughs join those discussions at the same time. So everyone is on the same page about what a site can and can't, what it is and isn't capable of bearing. And then obviously it goes through the local process, referral for here for stage 1 and 2. If the borough can't give permission and refuses, and on those kind of relative to the numbers involved, those relatively rare occasions that the mayor will disagree and will call it in, we would still want to cooperate with the borough. I suppose the degree to which that happens could be determined by the reasons for why it was turned down, because often the mayor is calling it in due to the lack of affordable housing, and sometimes we find it perhaps easier than it should be to add some affordable housing, considering what we would hope the boroughs to have done. There are some cases where height hasn't been added, and yet the mayor has. And actually, there's often the case in stage 2s as well, where the mayor has been able to negotiate additional affordable housing from the applicant, in addition to what the borough has secured, without changes to the massing of the scheme.
And that does have to do with us having quite a highly skilled viability team.
I think my main point is that when you are actually working out or negotiating changes to the original application as part of your stage through or call-in process, how much of say or close working that takes place with the borough council. Yeah. To me, I think that's crucial because they certainly have their own local plan, they have their own local community, they have their own sort of local aspiration and something, and indeed a major role to play within their own area.
We would agree with that, and I think Bishopsgate is a good example of where that has continued, because it was it was tough to decide whether it should go back to the boroughs again, and we kind of agonised over that, but in the end everyone settled on it staying here because it had got to that stage. It had been here for so long, and so as long as everybody continued to work together, and Tower Hamlets and Hackney being closely involved in it, they were content to leave it here and progress it that way instead of starting again at the borough level.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, do you think developers are quite clear about what is going to be called in and what is not going to be called in?
No, because I think it would be unhealthy if they did. They might rely on it. And they shouldn't, because as I've said on platforms to numbers of developers in conferences and things, that when the issue of call-in does come up, I said, look, we're not interested in doing the borough's job. The call-in process is a sort of an appeal route where something needs to be reviewed, not an alternative to progressing things as usual through the usual route. And we wouldn't want developers to get the impression that they don't have to satisfy what the borough wants. As long as they bring it here, we'll pass it through. That would be wrong.
How does that answer square with Sadiq Khan's manifesto pledge that said that he would set clear guidance for which developments the mayor will call in, including anywhere planning has stalled and where opportunities to deliver more new affordable homes are being missed?
Well,
has that guidance been issued?
Obviously the ultimate guidance will be adoption and implementation of the draft London plan, but obviously there have been clear staging posts along the way, such as the housing SPG, and that took us as far as we were allowed under the existing London plan to set the expectation for affordable housing. because obviously, as you know very well, you can't set new policy, but there's a certain room for manoeuvre within existing policy, and that allowed for the adoption of the SPG and the 35% threshold for fast tracking. So that gave certainty to developers that they wouldn't have to provide full viability information, and they could forego a late stage review if they provided 35% affordable housing, not on public land, that's 50, but at standard 35% affordable housing, and the tenure split was compliant with local policy. Not just, it didn't, so obviously the Mayor will accept 30% of the 35, 30% London affordable rent, and up to 70% intermediate, if that's what the borough policy is. There's plenty of borough policy out there that's 70% low cost rent, 30 intermediate, and the Mayor would, to be fast track compliant for the Mayor, it would have to follow that local policy for tenure compliance.
Thank you very much for those replies. We've hit 2:30.
Okay. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
Can I ask the
and
IP
very
question?
much do I beg your pardon?
Ask the EIP question.
Oh, go on, you ask it, because I've forgotten what it was.
Okay. Jules, while we have you here, we just wanted to ask you, because it's the work of the committee is ongoing on this, is when you are going to publish the consolidated response to all the London Plan EIP.
Next week.
Next week.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
There will be two versions.
Oh, yes.
One is the simple black and white version, and then there is
They're
a multicoloured version, rainbow coloured, showing all the track changes that happened at the different stages, whether they were the early suggested changes, the changes made during the EIP, and the post-EIP changes at the behest of the inspector.
Brilliant.
Look forward to seeing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll just have a quick break now for our guests second tranche of guests to find their seats. I don't have to hit that, do I?
No, it didn't. It was only 30 seconds. So.
In Juliemma, said
Can we answer some of the previous questions?
in fact, we can. He did
You
consider
probably
some
will be
Okay.
covering some of those,
Yeah, you can answer.
because I could see you
Sure.
shaking your head on some of the stuff I was asking, sir. And I've got those to come back to you.
They are going to introduce themselves.
Are you going to introduce yourself? Yeah, let's introduce yourselves. Go on.
Yeah.
First of all,
Say what
before
their involvement was.
formally, I really should say this rather before we get going. I'd just like to ask any of the invited guests, now you're at the table, if you have any interest to declare which are relevant to the business of this meeting, and perhaps can they do that while they introduce themselves? If you could do that while you introduce yourselves. So let's go from the left, Peter Evans.
What represents significant effect in the London. Thank you. My name is Peter Eversden. I'm chairman of the London Forum of Amenity and Civic Societies, established 31 years ago by the Civic Trust to represent community groups across London. I do have an interest in that I have attended as Rule 6 party several inquiries, several of which the Mayor has been involved at the time, whichever Mayor it was. One of which we had the Mayor as a supporter of the developer against two local authorities, which was a problem. So, but my interests today relate a lot to an opportunity area known as the Brentford East, and we have there the ex-Citron site as an example, which I may use.
Thank you. Dr. Dennis?
Yeah, I'm Edward Dennison. I'm here in my capacity as a member of the Mount Pleasant Neighbourhood Forum. I suppose I have an interest in so much as I was one of 4 representatives at the public hearing that was here at the GLA in 2014 when I was a member of what was then the Mount Pleasant Association. We've since become a formal neighbourhood forum, so I'm here as a member of the Mount Pleasant Neighbourhood Forum. I do work at the Bartlett School of Architecture. I'm an associate professor, but I'm an architectural historian. I have no specific expertise in planning or architecture in London, I should say, so I'm here strictly as a representative of the community and the organisation of the Mount Pleasant Neighbourhood Forum.
Thank you. Michael Bach.
Michael Bach. I'm the chair of the Planning, Environment and Transport Committee of the London Forum. And I should say we've been involved in this issue of the call-in powers since before the Mayor got them, because we opposed them because of the examples in Australia where state ministers of planning got together with their mates in the property industry and called things in to get them through. So we were opposed to these powers. I'm here also as a consumer of this process. I'm involved in Newcomb House, where the Kensington Society, which I'm chair of the planning committee, supported the scheme. It's a bit of a surprise. And the Kensington Forum Hotel, where both as Kensington Society and my Residents Association, and as personally, I was an objector, and so I was actively involved and not happy with the outcome. I submitted a paper beforehand, which you may have seen, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that. But basically, I'm thinking that the process isn't fit for purpose.
And finally, Nicholas Boyd-Smith.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas Boyd-Smith. I am the director of Create Streets, which is a social enterprise. It's a charity that does research into associations between urban form and good wellbeing outcomes and property support for housing. The interest that seems rather historic now that I declare is, together with Dr. Dennison, was very involved with the Mount Pleasant case. It wasn't a formal witness, but I think I felt like a formal witness. I certainly was very close to that. I've sort of followed many of the other cases, but don't have any sort of other than very fleeting direct link.
Thank you very much. Our first, by all means, do incidentally in your answers, if you wish to address some of the questions that we asked the Deputy Mayor, by all means do answer. We'll take that on board as well. But our first set of questions are going to be asked by Assembly Member Gavron.
So, well, perhaps I'll start with Peter and Michael and then move on to others. Do you, it's really, to all of you really, do you have any comments on the type of developments that are being called in by the Mayor?
Yes, I think what we're seeing is a call-in to increase affordable housing, and to do so by ending up with affordable housing of the wrong kind in the wrong place. That's my simple outlook on it.
So what do you mean by the wrong kind?
The boroughs are refusing developments, even when there is 40% affordable housing, as in the case of the ex-Citron site, because it's completely the wrong kind. It's usually shared equity at a massive quantity, low-cost housing almost negligible. The Mayor, in calling in these applications, even though it's over his threshold already, achieves more shared equity by increasing the heights of buildings. And then the borough is left equally as dissatisfied, and so are its communities, because it hasn't got the homes it needs. And I think this is the absolutely essential thing that the Mayor should be trying to achieve. Meet the SHMA requirements, meet the London Plan objectives in supplying homes that are required. And he's not doing so.
So if the call-in, just to take, so if the call-in had resulted in the shared ownership being converted into social rent, would you then have been happy?
Yes, if the Mayor applied the money which he has, I think it's 4.2 billion, in that direction, we would be very happy. Unfortunately, as you know from the Assembly's investigation, he is not allowed to do so, because the government has ring-fenced that money to shared equity to a degree which is not in line with the Mayor's requirements, but the Mayor is hampered by that. Therefore, he cannot do what you described. We would be delighted if he could.
50% of his grant has to go on shared equity,
yes,
on intermediate housing.
and the developers are already delivering 30 to 40% shared equity when the SHMA indicates that only 18% is required in London.
Oh, so, okay. So, but also they could be delivering something under Section 106, couldn't they? They didn't.
They could, yes.
Yes, it doesn't have to come out of grant.
No.
So there's a point there. Are there other comments that people want to make on, the type of applications that are being called in?
Can I have a go and do 2 and 3 at the same time?
Yeah.
One thing you've unpacked the facts for 2 cases that the personal body that asked for it to be called in by the mayor was DP9, which was the agent for the applicant. But if you looked at some of the other schemes, you'd probably find there's some commonalities, like there are 2 schemes from Rockwell, for example, the Charlton scheme and the Kensington Forum scheme. We don't know whether at quite an early stage in the process they persuaded council officers here that if all else failed...
Sorry, can you just speak up a bit?
Sorry, we don't know whether they got any reassurance that if the council turned it down in Kensington, that the mayor would call it in. Now, I should say straight away, as I did at the beginning, I'm happy with Newcomb House, but that's not everybody's choice. But I was very against the Kensington Forum Hotel, which is 2 large towers, doubling the volume on the site, surrounded by conservation areas. Now, if you read the report, it suggested that this is strategic. I can't really see how the redevelopment of an existing hotel, albeit a large one, which produces 183 extra bedrooms at the end of it, is actually strategic with regard to the 56,000 rooms that are in the forecast to 2041, but of which only 150 rooms are put in terms of Kensington and Chelsea's requirement. In other words, 183 compared with the 56,000, it's rather difficult to say, goodness me, if this doesn't happen, it's a strategic disaster for providing things. So my real worry, really, which relates to your type of applications, I believe that some of these applications are not strategic.
Right.
But it's an Emperor's New Clothes type thing. Who's going to be daring enough to say that? And that is a real problem if what's been
Well, it has to be
through.
measured, doesn't it, against the they're sometimes called the protocol, but the 3 policies.
Yes, it should be, and I don't
The
think
soundness of this
I don't think it stands up.
soundness, strategic, affecting more than one borough.
No, it isn't.
We'll find out if it goes to court.
I mean, the trouble is that
And there's one more. There's one more.
Yes,
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 I'm going to ask you about this.
policies.
Impact on the London plan.
Yes, well, that's what I was talking about. In terms
Did you
of
argue this at the call-in?
Look,
And what was the
at
answer?
the hearing, no answer. Sorry. When you come to the process, it was a very compressed process. There were 21 days to get your comments in on the revised proposal, which was the 4th of June. Within a week, the officer had to turn it round and, if he could, incorporate what he'd learnt. And that then was the public document, which had to be out on the 14th in order to have a hearing on the 21st.
Michael, can I just say, you're going into another area, because it's interesting. No, it's okay, because what you're questioning is the protocol.
Again, the next question.
Yes, sorry. I'm going to the next... Well, I'll go to the next question, which is this bypassing the democratic process? Which is, if agents, developers, their public relations people can persuade behind the scenes the GLA that they should back this scheme, even before it's been to the local authority, that is bypassing. Now, I can't prove any of that.
Jules was very emphatic about that, wasn't he?
Yes, we all wrote it down. We were so struck by it.
He was very emphatic that it wasn't happening.
I have
That
to
didn't happen.
take absolute exception to that.
I just wanted to say, in the protocol, which is, I think, part of the Act, no, it's the 2016 protocol. Paul will put us right on this. It does say that you've got 14 days and 7 days. You haven't got very long to put in your objections, and maybe that's something that
I'm not grumbling about the 21 days.
maybe we should recommend its change.
I think the real problem is from the receipt of views to the hearing, you've got to work backwards. The report's got to be public well in advance.
That's a recommendation.
So there's, yes, it needed a longer time period. But I think most important is, even if we had, I don't think the report would have looked any different, because I don't think they took on board the comments that were made with regard to whether this is strategic or whether it's in line with the London plan, both with regard to tall buildings and the location of hotel developments.
Fine, okay.
So I don't think the report was basically written before all of the comments were in, and any difficult comments were probably marginalised. So in other words, this was always from day one going to be a report to support the recommendation that they already knew.
How can you prove that?
Well,
you've got evidence.
Looking backwards, how many have failed? We asked the officers, how many of the applications that you've dealt with have you ever recommended refusal? And the answer was 0. So the point of call-in is not like the Secretary of State's call-in, which is to test the proposal. It is actually, seems to be, to justify the proposal.
I just want some...
And the outcomes is all you need to look at, because the one that was the rogue one, which is the Charlton one, the mayor was up against a coalition from Greenwich, the Assembly member, the MP, the council and the community, which was unstoppable.
The real problem to me is that when the mayor calls something in, he doesn't apply the London plan or the local plan.
Yeah.
He considers only the things he wants to take into consideration. In the case of the Chiswick Curve, alongside Gunnersbury Cemetery, through to the Citron site, all leading up to the World Heritage Site of Kew Gardens and its universal value, none of that was taken into consideration in either of those mayoral comments. In other words, the mayor has ignored historic requirements in policy, he's ignored height in local plans like the Brentford East plan. He has failed to take into consideration. And yes, the Citron site affected more than one borough, but he completely ignored everything that Richmond had said. And Richmond were representing Kew Gardens as well as themselves.
I want to just come to... So what you're saying, Peter, is that... Because I just wanted... I was going to turn it around. You're saying there are 3 policies, and one of them is that it has... You know, can be called in if it has... I find it quite a strange policy. If it has significant impact on the London plan. Now, you're giving an example, perfect example, of where not just... The other one is the 2 boroughs and the soundness, you know, more than one borough, and the soundness. And you're saying that the mayor, in his determination, ignored the fact that it affected 2 boroughs, one of the policies for call-in, and ignored the fact that it had a significant impact on the London plan.
Yes.
That's interesting. Do you think, but you are arguing the opposite, I think.
I'm actually arguing much the same.
But if you were, do you think there should be a more rigorous definition of what it means to have an impact on the London plan? Do you think if that were more rigorously defined, then it might be taken more notice of? Because stay vague.
Yes, it's in legislation. It has been defined in terms of having a significant impact on the delivery of the strategy in the London plan.
Do you think that's rigorous enough?
Well, if you read it word by word, it should be. But unfortunately, if they take very little notice of the degree of significance, or if they massage the argument to try and cling on to something, find a hook that allows them to say it, they say it. With regard to policy, they name-check policies. In other words, they'll say policy CL12, which is tall buildings in Kensington and Chelsea.
Yeah.
But what they won't say is that the council has done exactly what the mayor and Historic England and Design Council have suggested, that you look across the whole of your borough and find out whether there are appropriate sites for tall buildings. And this site was not. In other words, they turned it down on a well-based policy.
Yes. Can I just say, do you therefore think, I mean, you might be saying, I don't know whether you are, do you think the mayor, that, you know, that these strategic, so-called, they're not really strategic, and that they shouldn't be called in? Is that what you're saying?
No, well, yes, that's one thing. If they're not strategic, they shouldn't be called in. But if they are called in, why is the mayor applying a slightly different approach to either the local planning authority or the Secretary of State, where you look at the degree to which it's in accord with the development plan policies and then weigh the other things against it? They really did not look at how seriously the conflict was with the plan, even their own plan.
Can I just bring Dr. Dennison in now, because you objected to something earlier and I wasn't sure what it is you objected to.
You just objected to President.
So let's find out what it is you objected to.
Well,
something about what the Deputy Mayor
It was Jules's comment about the procedure of the current process, where he said when something either needs reviewing, not as an alternative route through the planning process. That, I think, is certainly not the case that we experienced at Mount Pleasant. It was undoubtedly applied, the call-in was applied to get the scheme through planning. There was absolutely no doubt that in our mind. And when you look at DP9's website, on their front page, it says DP9 has a proven track record for delivering high-profile planning consents. You know, that is their business, and they are extremely well resourced to do so. So for us, there was no question about that. Just coming back to question 4, because we've deviated a little bit from that, although all the points are very interesting. I have no experience directly of other planning applications that have been called in, though when Mount Pleasant was called in as a neighbourhood community association, we did contact other sites that had, and Convoy's Wharf was certainly one, I can't remember others, but almost pretty much unanimously. They all sort of laughed and said, well, you're like a lambs to the slaughter. There's no doubt what's going to happen to you. You're going to be bulldozed in this process. So we knew what we were up against as a community group. And just, I think one thing for you as you know, public servants and this institution needs to recognise is who you're serving in terms of the communities that are in these sorts of situations, whether it's those communities and those members of the public, or whether it's the developers. And if DP9 comes to you and asks for such a proposal to be called in whose interests are you doing that? And in our case, there was no doubt that it was always in DP9's and their clients' interests. We weren't allowed any communication with DP9. We were allowed no communication with Royal Mail. We were allowed no communication with the architects. We were given very little time to discuss anything with your planning officials. So as a community group, we were literally isolated from that process. When the mayor came to a site visit, we were told absolutely no way could we meet him. It would be against protocol. So I think that's something you need to review. I appreciate you'll be exposing yourself to issues of bias and the like, but there needs to be some way in which the people that you represent are fairly represented in the process, not just for 15 minutes in that planning hearing.
Is there anyone here from Rockwell, from Greenwich? No, because it'd be interesting to know what they thought, because there were site visits then.
Hang on just 2 seconds. I'll just quickly pick up on a couple of points. I'll be brief. Actually, on the tube, I reread DP9's letter of application actually for Mount Pleasant. It's a very well written letter, and it argues its case very convincingly. And I think I put a more benign version of Michael's point. Actually, I think when you've got requirements as vague, I think that's a reasonable word, set out in the 2008 order, as you know, there are sound planning reasons for intervention, a significant impact on the implementation of the plan. You know, if you're a good planning advisor, you can really do anything you like with that. So I think I don't really almost criticise DP9. I think they're doing what they're paid on to do. This is going a little bit into the next question, but I think the case I'd make would be, and I've deliberately brought with me my copies of the London Plan and the transport strategy. There are lots of things that are very clearly cross-cutting across London, and which this place and the mayor exists to help happen, and they're to do with infrastructure and transport. You could argue things that cut across two boroughs, but I think there needs to be rather a clearer definition of what it is that allows the call in, and some things are going to be quite consequential. Could argue that some smaller things are much more consequential than just providing a lot of housing in one place. So, a cycle superhighway is arguably of more consequence than 400 homes in terms of its impact on London as an entity. So, I think the order is what's wrong, and as I understand statute, I may be getting this wrong. It'd be quite easy to remake. Again, I printed out and read it on the tube. It'd be quite easy to remake this. It doesn't require primary statute; it's secondary statute, as I understand it. That could be quite easily redrafted, and I think it should be, because I think that goes to the heart of what's going wrong here.
Yeah. I think you had a hint from Jules Pipe as to how the policy tests are being amended slightly in terms of what we would have expected. He said that often the borough has not achieved the affordable housing they could, and the GLA could achieve more. What we don't understand, since the GLA deploys John Vasher's viability team to help all the boroughs to achieve the best viability outcome, why that doesn't happen before you get to this stage. Because what's happening afterwards is that the GLA are using that as a reason for deviation from the London plan, when it isn't, when the offer is already above the London plan level, but the mayor thinks he could get more with the money available to him. Well, that dialogue should happen before you get to the call-in, and the people should be deployed from the GLA to help the borough achieve that outcome.
In the case of Mount Pleasant, it was the affordable housing that was one of many reasons why DP9 and the Royal Mail Group were felt that it was taking so long to get through both councils, because both councils have 50% targets, and DP9 and Royal Mail Group were offering initially 11%, it went up to 23%, but upon calling it went back down to 11%, so that the mayor could then champion the success of bringing it back up to 23%, which was still less than half of what the both councils were arguing for. So in that case, it was in Mount Pleasant's case, it was certainly nothing to do with affordable housing.
The problem sometimes starts with the mayor's process of responding to applications in the first place, before calling. Because I attended the Chiswick Curve public inquiry, as did Historic England and Royal Heritage Site Botanical Gardens, all represented by barristers, because the mayor's support for that case was deplorable. He said there would be absolutely no adverse effect whatsoever. And it was because of the simulated views which were used in that case that you may remember that we raised that issue in the EIP of the new London plan, that these views are taken with wide-angle lenses that make it look as though the developments would have no impact whatsoever. And the GLA team swallow that, and they write a report that says that a development which would harm the World Heritage Site, would harm listed buildings, Grade 1 listed buildings, the cemetery with the Katie Memorial and Gunnersbury Park, all listed, would have no effect, because they looked at the photographs and say it wouldn't. And the Rule 6 parties, Historic England and others, demonstrated absolutely the effect it would have. And they produced the right kind of representations. And the inspector said he would take them away and consider them. But the Secretary of State has not reported. He said he would report in March. He has not on that Chiswick Curve site, because we believe he's holding it together with the one that he's just called in, which is the Citron site. And we feel that the Secretary of State is trying to apply cumulative effect considerations, historic considerations, and other things that the GLA are not, which we would welcome if it turns out that way.
Can I just ask a last general question on this bit? Do you think there's a role for call-in by the mayor? Whoever wants to answer.
Well, if you're going to have regional government, I think it's reasonable to assume that is something that must be conceivable. So I would in principle, Mike's going to disagree, but I think I'd in principle concede that it's an appropriate thing to exist. I would question, I'm going to repeat myself slightly, if we've got the criteria quite right, because it seems to me that the point is if it's legitimately London-wide, and I don't think that's quite happening at the moment, because the definition is so loose that essentially it's becoming it has become a way in which large sites happen in the face of essentially community resistance or local borough resistance. And that's not a sufficiently refined definition of regional government, it seems to me. because if regional government is doing its job, it won't just be making things happen, or no more would it just be turning things down, but it's essentially just making things happen. It should be making it better, surely. And so I'd be defending this, or defending the regional call-in powers, if we were looking at a list of, say 15, 20, whatever it is, and a third have been approved, perhaps in the teeth of a bit of local opposition, because that was judged to be the right thing, a third have been turned down, and a third have been improved or altered in some substantial way, because actually the mayor was able to come in, his team were able to come in and say, look, this is being done to suit Islington, but actually isn't taking account of the effect on Camden, or whatever it might be. So I think if we get to that, then it's a very, very justifiable thing, but it's not at that stage yet.
Because originally, the first 8 years, we didn't have the power of call-in. We just had the power, which of course the mayor still has, to direct refusal. Does anyone else? Do you think there's a role for call-in?
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I would agree, but what you're looking at is this is the latest edition of planning. And
we've all got it. We're all reading it assiduously.
Good. But what it shows you, if this was the mayor's ones, they'd all be dark blue. That means it's been allowed. Is that right around? Yes. The light blue is dismissed. That means when the Secretary of State does a call-in, you get some allowed and some refused. When you look at the results of mayoral call-in, it's a one-way street. In other words, as soon as call-in is announced, you might just as well give up, because we knew that in January for Kensington Forum, and it was quite predictable that was going to be the result in June. We could have saved ourselves a lot of time. We had to fight.
It's the same. Sorry, with Mount Pleasant's exactly the same thing. The amount of resources that you're and pressure you're putting on communities to fight something which is ultimately pointless. I would say that the call-in process, in principle, maybe it's a nice idea, but in practice it clearly doesn't work. As Michael has said about the number of call-ins, you just need to look at the track record. It doesn't hold up to what Jules is asserting.
So what would make it work?
Well, I think you have to trust, in my view, you have to trust the borough, the local authorities in the way that they assess and review these applications. If the process was, as Nicholas has described, much more even in historical terms, in the way that you assess them within this administration, then that would be all right. But it's not. It clearly isn't working properly if you're accepting everything that comes through this building.
But the mayor is not challenging the reasons for which the local authority refused it. He is actually taking cases which have been refused on London plan policies. He's then increasing height and bulk, which makes it even more a deviation from policy. And that just seems crazy to me.
At Mount Pleasant, we were both boroughs, it's cross boroughs, and both rejected the application. How can two boroughs come to that conclusion through all the rigorous process that you expect of a local borough to undertake, and then for it to be passed so swiftly by the GLA? It doesn't make sense if you're going to apply planning policy rigorously.
I think there's a difference between the way these cases are assessed compared with the way the Secretary of State does it on one hand or the local planning authority does on the other, following the line in the legislation to determine applications according to the development plan unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. I don't think that the way the mayor assesses it is assessing the impact, whether it conforms with policies and then looking at the impact. He just completely disregards the policies, his own and the local ones.
Yeah.
So, Chair, I don't know if other members want to come in on this. Is there a last point from anyone?
It needs redesigning.
Needs redesigning. The call-in process?
Absolutely it does, yeah.
I'm done.
Thank you. Assembly Member Shah, if you could.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I mean, I have always placed community engagement at the centre of everything, particularly with planning applications. This is something in normal planning process, in my view, doesn't quite happen in the way how effectively it should be done. When it comes to call-in process, it leaves even bigger question marks about community engagement. I know, Edward, in your comment, you talked about the bias, and Nicholas mentioned community resistance to the applications which are generally controversial, particularly at that level when they are called in. So the two questions I have, the first one is that to what extent do you think the local community has sufficient knowledge of or access to mayoral negotiations with the applicants, the developers, and amendments to applications that have been called in?
That depends on the borough. It varies tremendously. I mean, if a borough wishes to be totally helpful and make sure that everyone in the community, in the neighbouring boroughs as well, because sometimes they're affected, is fully kept aware of what is happening, then that would be a good process. But we don't believe that happens. And also, when the communities write their response to the mayor's stage 1 and stage 2 reports and tell him that some of the things he's looking for are impossible, such as the mayor said the borough will negotiate section 106 to make Gunnersbury Station accessible. Gunnersbury Station is locked in the base of a building called BSI. There is no way that that station can be made more accessible than it is. And it wasn't only accessibility, it was the number of ticket gates, so that people are now queuing outside that station for 20 minutes before they're allowed in to get on a train. So things that the mayor is indicating to communities are possible, and they write in and say, no, it's not, are not taken into account. And also, it's not just depending on the local authority keeping people informed, it's people's ability to be engaged. And we work with the Just Space Network and others because they're our people, the community civic societies, know the planning process. But that's only a tiny fraction of communities. And communities don't understand it. And they need to be helped. They need to be fully informed and given the opportunity to know what's going on.
Yeah, there is gap at that level in terms of capacity of community to understand and engage properly with planning applications. But where I think I would challenge or disagree with your earlier comment that council should be left pretty much at calling process to make community aware of the changes in application and what they should be doing. Why should the mayor and his team not be responsible? Because they are in charge of calling process. As it is, planning authorities are really struggling in terms of their own resources. They can barely manage statutory consultation. So don't you think that the GLA team and the mayor's team, when they're calling in those substantial, significant applications, that the onus should be as much on them to actually lead the whole of that process?
I agree it should, and Jules Pike said it was. And he said that he looks at all the people who wrote in about an application, then he makes sure they're informed. But there could be things that are happening that change the process, that change the application, which would be of interest to other people. So it is when some of these changes happen that it's not just the original objectors that need to be told, it's other interested parties, and that can be achieved through the local authority if it's done properly.
No, I mean, I'm not denying that for one moment. I want not only the objectors, for example, or people who've responded who are on record, but it's much wider engagement, which adds to the ones who weren't probably even aware of this major project. So yes, it should include everyone.
For me, it's a question of power, and that's why I asked you to ask yourselves who you're serving, whether it's the developer or the communities, because for us we had absolutely no or practically no correspondence at all with the GLA once they called it in. That door seemed firmly shut, but we as a community were absolutely adamant that we were not opposition to this development. We were absolutely pro-development, and I think that sort of in some ways confused the mayor at the time. He was expecting us to be oppositional, and his narrative was always that we were, until he realised that we actually absolutely were not. And with funding from the GLA, we put forward, as you probably know, an alternative proposal for that site that was higher density and had more affordable housing. So as a community, we were desperate to engage. We wanted discussions with the landowner, the Royal Mail Group at the time. We wanted discussions with DP9, and we wanted to have an open forum just simply for the process to be transparent. We were doing everything we could that we thought was right in terms of the democratic process, but when that process is taken away from you at a local level, And as Peter said about the local councils, we had experience of both councils. One, in the case of Camden, was much more open, much more supportive than Islington was. That's just the way it was. But as a community group, trying to be at the middle of all of that, being sort of pulled in every direction and yet being sort of locked out of any discussions we were trying to have was incredibly frustrating. When you think you have something to add, whether it's a proposal in the form of the community right to build that we put forward, or simply giving our own sort of expert knowledge from a community level towards the developer to try and improve the development that they were putting forward.
You're saying your alternative was supported or paid for by the who?
GLA.
By the GLA.
Yeah, through the community right to build process.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel that I remember the application, so I'm looking with my view, but do you feel that proposing that alternative was, on reflection, a good use of your time, or do you think it was given the consideration that it needed to?
I do. I think again it came down in the end to the local authorities because and they were imbalanced in their support for that, as they are with regards to neighbourhood forums and the Localism Act, for example. It varies from borough to borough, but as a community group trying to put forward a better alternative, it was absolutely the right thing to do, and I would stand by that. I think it was a very useful exercise, and it was very welcomed at a time where people felt that as a community we'd come together. We created a neighbourhood forum, which is no small task in its own right, to bring together the ideas the community thought that were valid on that site, that particular site, and to improve that site. I think that's a
do you feel once that plan had been developed, you submitted that to the local authority, is that correct?
That is correct, isn't it? Yeah.
It was the planning inspectorate.
It was the planning inspectorate, and then but that was rejected in the end on the grounds of car parking, because the mayor had approved, despite the fact that both boroughs have zero car parking in new developments, the mayor had approved 200 car parking sites on that site. We didn't want any car parking on our community right to build site, and that's where the planning inspector failed our application.
And once that plan reached the mayor at the time, do you think that alternative was given consideration? Did he take that into account, do you think?
I don't think he was interested in any alternative or any community voice in any way from the outset. In fact, I should go on to say that at the public hearing, we happened to know that he wanted to finish that hearing early because he was flying to Italy with, happens to be a sort of a C-list celebrity who is in our neighbourhood, and we knew that he was leaving for Italy at that time. I can't say if this is being live cast, but
it is.
So it was a rather hasty ending to that
now. So
that's the sort of contempt that I felt that the community were held in at the time.
Right. Okay.
Could I give you a quick answer to the question?
Yeah.
I don't think the community knows anything about the negotiations that are going on until they're revealed in a new application. Now, the developer, this is an experience with Kensington Forum Hotel, the developer did do an exhibition at the time that his application was being amended, and yes, we saw it at that stage. But the community has no access to the process of negotiation that's going on between the mayor and the applicant, and whether that's going on before the first application or after the application has been refused, we don't know. But that took place without any engagement. What I should say about the GLA, we gate crashed the officers and had several meetings, including a walkabout, to try and inform them better about the context. But the thing was already set with a positive recommendation, so I'm not sure that we actually made much impact.
Community groups have said to me, if the mayor hadn't intervened, we fully supported the grounds for refusal of the local authority, and the developer would probably have lost on appeal and had to come back with a scheme that we wanted, which would have conformed to the local plan and the London plan. But the mayor not only approved the rejected scheme, he made it worse.
It's worth adding on that, as I recall, Edward, correct me if I've got my details wrong here, that the proposal on the Mount Pleasant site did not comply with the SPG for the site or with the two borough plans.
That's correct, the SPD, yeah.
So you know, you can argue London plan should have trumped the local plan, but the boroughs were going through the right process of holding it to their local plans. Can I just ask just two very quick things to the earlier question? You know, I'll say one thing in defence of the mayor, 'cause I think that should be done, which is, you know, these are by definition these are big and complicated sites. I think they are legitimately going to be difficult things for, you know, residents and neighbours to get their heads around. So I think there's a legitimate complexity to them. But as technology gets better, you know, the experience of trying to go through one of these pages with, you know, 25 documents on it, all at sort of 75 megs, just trying to take your way through it, even as a professional, is very difficult. When something comes up to this level, I think with, you know, all the resources of London available to this office, the expectation should be higher in terms of information, the visuality and the capacity to process that information to the wider public. So as I understand it, digital technology in Review City, I think, is improving. I think one recommendation might be when things are called in, you're expecting the mayor to make the information about that scheme, about its pros, about its cons, to allow people to understand it readily and quickly, far better, you know, far more speedily available than it is at the moment, because the current ability to process the data is very, very low. So I think that'd be something the mayor could legitimately and easily do.
Yeah, you kind of preempted my second question, which is great. No, I'm grateful to that, because you know, it is about, you know, how can the process, the protocol, be actually amended to make it more transparent, more accountable as well. And in my view, actually, not only community do not have much of an idea about what constitutes strategic projects, let alone stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, you know, what the hell they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, certainly, to me, therefore, that process is flawed. At community level, it needs amendments. The question is, what can the mayor do, you know, leaving aside legislation and you know, what legally they are required to do or not, but how can that process, the protocol, be improved so that there is some level of buy-in and understanding of what happens at call-in stage.
If I could just say, I mean, I totally support what Nicholas has just said in that regard, but I mean, for us as a neighbourhood, we created a community group which we called an association, which became a neighbourhood forum. The resources to do that, we didn't have those resources, they don't exist. And I think if you're going to call something in and impose enormous pressures on communities to respond to that, you have to give them the resources and support them in whatever way. That might be financial resources, might be setting up meetings, hiring facilities, just bringing someone along to even explain the vocabulary of the type of planning, all of the sort of the planning.
But that's where I had a problem with Jules' comment that, well, let the boroughs do it. Boroughs haven't got that capacity.
You've taken out the hands of the boroughs at that stage.
Well, you are, but then, you know, you're taking, in one instance, for first thing you say, well, we're taking it out of your hands. Yeah. Then you're saying, oh, but then you still do the consultation. Doesn't make sense.
But that should be a fairly easy thing for you to implement. If you're going to take that decision to call something in, you have to take responsibility to fully inform and support the informing of communities in what they're about to engage with.
One of the wider themes, I've been doing some work on planning across the country actually recently, but one of the wider themes that's emerged nationwide, and no reason to believe it's not true in London, is that there's a growing sense that, you know, the planning system isn't working and that it's facilitating, you know, developers' processes being sort of parachuted in. And there's a sense that, you know, people are the recipients of it as being done at them. And there are lots of counterexamples, so, you know, one mustn't be too broad brush. But I think if we've got regional government in London, London's unique in England in having that. By definition, it's going to be a bit of sort of parachuting in. It's going to, if it's going to do anything, it isn't going to be hyper-local. That sort of goes in territory. If you're going to call things in, you can make a case for that, I think. But if you're going to, I think you need to, at the very least, be allowing community engagement to continue to the same quality, and I would urge and aspire that you should aspire to be doing rather more. You've got some economies of scale. By definition, these are all going to be big and complicated sites. Local boroughs deal with a smaller proportion of them. That's all you deal with. So I think having a process that working with these big, well-funded developers to help them provide the information, to make available visual information, key data in a easy to gurgitate, if that's the right word, fashion, I think would be a legitimate quid pro quo for what at the moment is a one-way street for the developer. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. It doesn't wouldn't answer all of Edward's quite legitimate challenges, but it would at least rebalance the process a little bit.
I think we have to make communities aware of the Stage 1 and Stage 2 reports before calling, because those are significant. They can imply a potential call-in. They can contain things which are factually incorrect, as Historic England had to point to 10 incorrect statements in one of the Mayor's reports. The communities then should know about that, because they should say to their borough, how are you going to deal with that? How is that going to be put to the planning committee in your case officer's report? What do you think the Mayor's Stage 1 and Stage 2 reports were correct? Some of our more, should I say, educated groups, we have retired town planners, we have someone who was the development director at Hammersmith and Fulham. In our community groups, they know all this process. They'll look at the Stage 1 and Stage 2 reports and they'll write in and say that's wrong. But they're ignored.
But the real catch-22 is that although in some of the documentation it talks about potential strategic importance, by the time you've got to make a decision to call in, you've already judged that it is, and as a result, looking at the track record of two mayors, it's almost 100% saying it's allowed. We could all just go home if the mayor just, you might just as well be doing a directing people to allow it.
Peter raises a good point also, I think, in regards to, we had to fill out a survey before we came here today about diversity and inclusion, and I think you've got to understand how, if a community is to organise itself to respond to something like a call, and even if it's at a local level, it will attract a certain type of individual, maybe a retired expert, or people who have the time. It will exclude a lot of individuals who maybe for meetings in the evening cannot attend because they're looking after elderly or young members of the family. There are so many pressures that communities simply cannot bear in dealing with the types of issues that you're dealing with every day, which the likes of DP9, that's their bread and butter. They do it all the time. So as Nicola said, it is a one-way street entirely. So there has to be a system whereby you support the communities so they are fairly represented. It's not just about representation. They must be fairly represented, that you reach every corner of each community. And that's a huge challenge, but I think it's a challenge that you bring upon yourselves by having this policy.
I think Michael very naughtily exaggerated just now. It's not 100%. I just did the maths. It's 96.4%.
Yes,
so Michael was exaggerating the chance of getting
changes the outlook completely.
That's the exception.
I think the committee should be very interested in what I'm interested in, is what will the Secretary of State say to two interventions by the Mayor in West London. If he says the process that the Mayor applied was wrong, the conclusions that the Mayor came to were wrong, I think that would be quite significant. Because
but those are appeals, aren't they?
They were refused by the local authority, they were approved by the Mayor, they were then called in, and we're awaiting to see what the outcome would be. I think that could be quite a test, because
we've got a ridiculous situation where we've got competitive calling.
Yes.
No sooner has the Mayor decided one thing than the Secretary of State is calling it in. I mean, Newcombe House is an example, and that would have happened on Kensington Forum as well, except that the Mayor signed everything off that afternoon, including all the Section 106 agreements, before anybody could do anything.
As I understand it, with the clear intent of avoiding a call-in by the Secretary of State. So, Navin, have you finished your? Thank you. Could you tell me if I've kind of got an answer to this already? Do you think the Mayor has some very tight protocols for site visits? Do you think the Mayor's protocols for conducting site visits ahead of representation meetings, or even representation meetings themselves, do you think those protocols need reviewing in any way? And Dr. Dennis, I think
guess our answer.
I kind of guess your answer because you were complaining earlier about not having any access to the Mayor.
Well, that's right. I think we did appeal to the GLA when we knew that this site visit would be taking place, and we were told very firmly that we must not in any way attend that, we must not be present at that, there is no way in which he will meet us or have any sort of communication with us at that site visit or any time after or before. I appreciate that having some sort of communication with the community does potentially expose you to accusations of bias from a developer, but I think it's necessary to have that sort of conversation with the community, whether it's at a site visit or at other hearings. It seems only fair, since DP9 in our case has access to you, has access to your institution. Why should the community not also have that sort of access? If it's all recorded, and when we were fighting this, we made the case that it was all about transparency. If everything is out in the open, then there can be no accusations of bias or sort of skullduggery. So I think they should be reviewed, and I think particularly the representation as well. 15 minutes for a community, but that's literally the only time we had to speak to anyone or make our voice publicly heard.
That's in the committee meeting.
In the committee
itself.
meeting for 15 minutes, and of course there isn't just one person who's going to speak at that hearing. So we had to share that 15 minutes very strategically between different members of the community.
And that committee meeting is, of course, a committee of one. Isn't it?
Yes,
that's right.
With the mayor sitting.
With regard to the site visits, I would like the mayor to conduct himself in the same way as an inspector. An inspector at an inquiry will say, what do you think I should visit? Why do you think I should visit it? And give me all your reasons. The community, the local authority, they all contribute to that. And then you're making sure that the right places are visited. I mentioned Gunnersbury Station. I don't know if the GLA people went to it. We were told they did not. The factory is locked in the base of a building physically, and could not have the changes the GLA were hoping for, would have come out. So I would like to influence what it is that the GLA does in their visits for reasons that we would normally define to an inspector. And then he can judge whether...
How do other people feel? It sounds a very sensible suggestion that the mayor should...
I strongly concur. We should broaden it a bit, if I may, just perhaps to give a little bit of sort of philosophical background. The organisation I run, we do co-design with community groups sort of day in, day out almost. The process, for me, as the non-local coming in, the process of walking around a site, not just the actual within the red line, but walking to it from the street over there or from looking at it from over there, and doing that with a range of different people who will not always agree, will have different perspectives and different priorities. I was going to say it's incredibly informative. It's beyond that. It's actually an essential part of responding properly to a site. Any decent designer does it, and you don't, but you should. You're coming in as essentially a quasi-judicial role to make that trade-off. You can't spend days and days doing it, I think we appreciate that, but at the very least being informed, ideally perhaps doing half an hour with one side and half an hour with the other, or whatever it might be. It seems to me a very reasonable thing to ask. If the mayor was doing hundreds of these, clearly that would be unreasonable. He's not. He's doing a couple a year.
Yeah.
So
we would ask that the mayor's team went and stood where each of the photographs is supposedly taken from, that show that the development will be totally insignificant.
Yeah. So we have actually done that.
Yeah.
We had a walkabout with the officers. The officers refused to respond to the issue that wide-angle photographs distort what you actually see. If you're familiar with photography, a 24mm lens gives you a wide thing, but it pushes things away.
Yeah, I remember they sold my flat and they doubled the size of it.
What do the eye sees? I mean, I went to the same spots and took a 50mm lens, which is roughly what the eye sees, and it's so radically different. Now, we took them round that, and to give them their due, they probably took the mayor round a similar route, but they wouldn't tell us when the mayor was going to come, and one of our number bumped into them, this entourage, and they were extremely embarrassed because the rules say don't take any locals with you.
I'm going to...
The rules don't.
Yeah.
Sorry,
The
protocol.
Yeah, well,
Can I just interrupt for a minute?
Words.
The protocol doesn't say that. The protocol
it does.
says that the community and the applicants and stakeholders should be there, but they can only speak. They're not there to lobby.
No,
And this is the
applies
mayor's
to
protocol.
everybody.
Can I just finish? And they can only speak if the mayor asks them to speak. Now,
Can I just say?
and we have Greenwich, for whatever reasons, aren't able to be here, but But the one application that was turned down, the mayor did a site visit, and they were there, you know, I would like to know whether, you know, whether he asked questions or not, and how far he went and talked to the industries and all the different stakeholders. But that is in the protocol. And one more thing while I've got the floor for a moment. Nicholas said, I think it was Nicholas who said this, that the inspector actually can, you know, I want to know, when it's a government inspector on behalf of a Secretary of State calling, is it different from then what the mayor's protocol says?
I think it was Peter who touched on that, but my understanding, I'm not happy to defer to Peter, but my understanding is that it is, and certainly my limited experience with inspectorates is that it's very different, and is very much more clearly is judicial in its role, and he takes advice from all parties.
So maybe we should be following that here. Maybe the mayor, we should recommend, because we're going to make recommendations.
I think you should compare it, but I did print out, but I can't find it, the regulations that you've produced, and it's quite explicit about not inviting members of the community.
And I'd like to just concur with that in regards to Mount Pleasant. I haven't got the email here, but we were told categorically from your planning officer that we were not allowed to be part of that.
Not part of it.
But the mayor's protocol says the opposite. Our mayor's protocol
Well, your planning
say.
officers didn't concur with that. They absolutely did.
I think you've got some really, I didn't know that actually.
So 2016 protocol.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at, which I can't...
But the site visit for Mount Pleasant was in 2014, is that?
Well, that's because it was pre that, you see.
Yeah.
And I think a lot was learned from Mount Pleasant.
Oh, here we are. Shall I just tell you?
Good,
yes.
Go on.
Obviously not enough.
All's not lost.
These procedures on representation site visits. It says... maybe it wasn't this one, it was the other one. But it certainly was... I mean, most of it is fine. But it
does say community groups can be there.
Even
well,
then, that being said, whatever the outcome is that, Mr. Everson, you're saying that the mayor should look for more comments from those community groups who may be there as a result of the update.
Yeah.
So should be more proactive.
It actually says very clearly, objectors stroke supporters will not normally be invited to attend a site visit. You can't get much clearer than that.
Right. And that's
There's some scope for...
I have the protocol written.
But this is actually called the Procedure for Representation Hearings at the Greater London Authority.
Okay.
And I printed it off.
What date is that?
It's your latest one. It was the one that was referred by Mr. McLoughlin to us as something we might read. So I did.
Good witness. It's a good witness. It's sort of witness.
Absolutely.
Well, I've just had one read to me which said...
So,
sorry, I'm telling you what they say, and I'm telling you the experience that we were definitely not invited, and they were embarrassed when somebody just happened to bump into them. So it strikes me that opportunity does not exist for communities.
I don't even know if there's a list of what the mayor intends to go and visit. So you could...
No.
Because he may not actually visit the ones that you would like him to. He may not even have visited the ones that were on the list because he didn't have time.
Because it does, this is important. Understanding a place and understanding the consequences of an intervention in it do require you to physically go there. And so far, this may change in time, but virtual reality hasn't replicated that yet.
It will never.
Well, who knows? I'm not, it's not imminent. And you need to know where to be and where to look, and you need to understand where people go. And you can read that, and you can understand the site, the desire lines and all that stuff. But actually, there's no substitute for physically going there. And if you're, driven around to 2 or 3 carefully selected sites, you're going to form a different opinion to if you visit there with people who live and use the site or nearby on a regular basis.
I would also suggest that you go at different times as well. It's not a site visit is insufficient. You need to go there perhaps depending on the site itself, but the weekends, rush hour.
We're only going to get the mayor once.
Yeah, I think that's probably pushing
so
it.
I missed out one sentence. It was on the next page. Any request for objectors or supporters to attend will be considered by the mayor, and attendance will be at the discretion of the mayor. If you don't know when it's going to happen, you haven't got a chance.
Okay.
And it's not advertised, is it?
It's not advertised.
I mean, there are certain protocols that are adopted when local authorities do site visits of councillors on planning applications as well, and there are years since I sat on may I say, a local authority planning committee. But I remember at the time we weren't allowed to be subjected to overt lobbying by one side or another, and there's a nod from a councillor in the audience who's saying that's pretty much what the procedure is now. So we're not talking about being particularly different from the general protocol that's adopted for determining planning applications.
I think there's an interesting, again, this gets quite a fundamental question, which is the mayor's role here more equivalent to a planning authority, which is, as I recall it, what the deputy mayor was asserting or implying, or is it more similar to a planning inspectorate or secretary of state? The truth is it's equidistant perhaps. So where is it appropriate to be following the protocol of local council? Where is it appropriate to be more like the planning inspectorate? There's probably not one easy answer to that. But at the moment it feels uncomfortably like you're perhaps the worst of both bits, because you're just saying yes to everything.
So we've had quite...
That's a really, really good point to be made.
There's one thing you haven't covered
We should
yet.
look at those two, because the mayor, I mean, it isn't quite like a local authority, is it?
No, it's not.
Because it's already been for a local authority, the
There's a
application.
representation hearing we haven't dealt with yet,
Yes.
which is your last question.
Yes, indeed.
What we found, yes, it took some time to establish when they wouldn't just say yes, you've got 15 minutes. What we've also found, there was no flexibility on timing. So somebody was still in full flight and they were cut off.
Again, that's not... I don't think that's dissimilar from planning meetings.
Well, sorry, when there's 15 minutes,
quasi,
some people take more or less. Then there's the question of the mayor's questions. They should be able to be answered by people other than the person who he's asked it to, because very often they may not be in a position to answer the question. And if the aim is to secure information, he should allow other people to answer it. There is another problem, and that is that the mayor tends to use questions for point scoring rather than a genuine desire to get information. And it politicises the process to a degree that you don't feel very comfortable as a witness. He's the decision maker, not the advocate for the scheme. No, but he's behaving a bit like a QC interrogating witnesses rather than really just... Sorry? I know what his profession is. But,
excuse me.
So there's a question that people should be able to answer the question. For instance, one of our members was asked, do you know how many car parking spaces there are in this proposed hotel development? Because she was talking about air pollution. Actually, it was a rubbish question, because it's not the amount of car parking spaces, it's actually how are these people going to arrive? Most of them, instead of coming in coaches as they do now, are going to arrive in individual vehicles. And they're going to drop them off. So the car parking spaces are totally irrelevant. But you could have answered that question to him, but he only wanted to hear from somebody who he wanted to knock down because she didn't know the answer. So it must be, at the moment it seems a bit partial in the way he's conducting it. I know that's personal to his style, but it is a problem at the receiving end. I'm talking as a consumer.
And you're saying that's... Why do you think that is? Is that just the personality of the mayor, or is it the
so I haven't
highly
anything else to
charged
compare it with.
situation?
I mean, I didn't witness Boris Johnson doing it, so I can't tell you he did it differently. He probably did. Or rather, it was more likely Ed Lister who did it. So I can't compare.
Okay.
But I think... otherwise, I have to say the hearing process was pretty good. And you can't fault it in terms of giving enough time for objectors and proponents of the scheme, supporters of the scheme. In some ways it's even better than at the local authority, where we squeezed out 10 minutes from them and they were only going to give us 6 to begin with. We had 15 from the start with the mayor, and that was good. And the same with Newcombe House. I feel the structure's right. I think the real problem is the very tight timetable between the completion of the officer's report and the event, which allows people to tailor what they're going to say. But I suppose I should just say, I don't think it would have mattered what we said. And that's the sad thing.
It is sad. It is sad because I think at the hearing or before the hearing, there is no proof or statement from the mayor that the decision of the borough was wrong. These are things refused by boroughs all over London on the basis of their plan, the London Plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. He does not say they were wrong in this respect, that respect or the other respect, therefore I will approve, I will overrule them. He doesn't go into that detail at all. We're learning nothing from this process. The local authorities are learning nothing. We don't know what to do with another one because he is just taking a refusal and not commenting on it. He's saying, I'm going to approve it because I've got a little bit more affordable housing, even though it's gone up 2 floors, which was the reason for it being refused in the first place. We want to see the London plan, the local plan, applied. And the boroughs are doing it, and the mayor isn't.
It's not, yeah. I think that's where I felt that certainly our experience of the hearing was it was largely pointless. It was the conclusion really to 6 months of inevitable process that was entirely prejudiced against the community and pro the developer. So for us it was just a formality, and you could see that they had absolutely no interest in interrogating any of the actual plan before him. It was a show.
It's totally different, as I said before, between what the local authority does or the Secretary of State does, which is to follow the legal requirement to assess it in accord with the plan.
You're saying it's much more subjective.
Well, sorry, they're setting out to prove that it's strategic, or that they were right to call it in, but they don't actually assess the performance of the scheme in terms of, is it the right place according to the development plan, that being both the local plan and the London plan. And when you raised it with them, it wasn't recorded in the report, and we might just as well not said it on the day because nobody took any notice.
It just seems that the context and character considerations and the cumulative effect of adjacent large developments are not taken into account.
Right, we've heard quite a lot about what's wrong with the process, and from your experiences, and it's been extremely useful, may I say. So what would a better process look like if there's consensus that there probably needs to be something like a call-in? But is that fair to say that there should be that power in reserve?
I'm not 100% certain on that. But
you're not. I'm sorry. I didn't want to.
But it's a defensible power. I think you can make a case for it. You can make a legitimate case for it.
Well, if it
how should that look? What would be, for example, should perhaps, I'm just running this by you, would it be better if rather than being made by a committee of one, that the called-in application should be made by a committee of, say, the London Assembly, or the Planning Committee? Is that something that might have encourage more engagement with the community? Is that something that would be more positive, or is there some other way in which this process can be used?
I think there is a legitimate question of who does it. Yeah. It's very strange. And I remember, when we started the Mount Pleasant process, and I hadn't previously appreciated that it was just the mayor, as a human being, who was the planning committee. And why go through? I'll say the charade, maybe that's a bit unfair, because in some ways the process is appropriately right. Why go through the procedure of a committee and a committee-style process, which is what you are going through? It seems to be based largely on the local authority process as opposed to the Planning Inspectorate or the Secretary of State, when just in fact one person who's doing it. Is the proxy, as I say, borough or semi-judicial. So I think there's a fundamental question there, and go either one way or the other. But I think it's sitting rather gainfully in the middle at the moment, with a foot in both camps. The second one, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here, is I think the definition of what is strategic and what is citywide is perhaps a better way of putting it. Actually, seems to me to be fundamentally flawed, and to allow, and there's no accusation how I put this, very reasonable and legitimate defence of just big stuff as being strategic. I don't think it's possible really to fault DP9's.
But would you say that should there be a redefinition?
Yes.
You're saying there should be, but say that's the case and you only then get strategic applications. Bishopsgate, I would have thought is probably strategic on that basis. Are you therefore content with, is that your only objection? Are you therefore content with the process that would come after that?
As it currently stands, I don't think it's fully functioning, because it's acting as a borough committee, but nevertheless always seems to say yes. So it's clearly not working.
The problem if call-in assumes 96%, but it was actually designed to be 100%. Then you don't have any confidence in the process being one of assessing the potential strategic impact. It's already been decided, and that then trumps any other things that people object to. So it's, if you compare it again with the Secretary of State's one, that's done through a public inquiry. That's a very heavy-handed way of doing things, but some things get refused and some things get allowed. In the mayoral system, forget the aberration, it's 100% one way, and it's the decision.
So should somebody else be making the decision apart from the mayor?
You mean like handed over to Secretary?
Well, if you're saying there seems to be
committee, committee, you mean?
Well,
but would it be any different?
Well,
I think it would. I mean,
it would be different because what I'm asking, because what seems to be the problem here, and please tell me if I'm misunderstood, is that there seems to be an implication that because the mayor is the person that's calling them in, the mayor has a particular outcome in mind.
Well, the mayor is the executive. And that's not a criticism, it's just a fact.
Yeah.
A planning committee of a local council, and I'm not a local council, never have been, so happy to be corrected, but as I understand it, it represents both the executive and the opposition and cabinet backbench members, so it is a more complicated process. So running as I understand it, a borough-style process for someone who is, no criticism, essentially has to be, by nature of his day job, very close to the executive, seems to me to be so fundamentally misconceived. I don't think I necessarily would make the case for the full Secretary of State style process, because I'm not a fan of big and unnecessary government for the sake of it, but either run a borough style committee with a more borough style committee.
That's what we are talking about.
Or, I guess if it is going to be one human being, I think we probably do need to make it a bit more judicially correct procedures. Examples as the one Peter was making, I'm sure there are others.
Well, I think the mayor is acting rather like a planning inspector and the Secretary of State combined. Because he's holding a hearing, he is drawing conclusions, he's then referring that to himself and approving whatever the conclusions were. There would, if there was more involvement, if there was a kind of Rule 6 party opportunity, if it was a hearing spread over 3 or 4 days, as some appeal hearings are, then you would have representation from all parties, and it would include any consideration of changes that the mayor had negotiated with the developer in terms of conformity with the planning policies, both at all 3 levels and at neighbourhood level as well, if required. And that isn't happening. The opportunity isn't there. I think you asked if it should be referred to somebody else. Well, I would like to see more than he as the panel, if he is going to make the decisions, because other people on the panel could influence that decision by arguing against the conclusions he appeared to be drawing.
I think that there seems to be a fundamental flaw in the system where one person makes that decision. Because in our case, I think they knew full well that by going to that one person, given his inclination, he was going to approve it. If it were a panel or a committee or a wider group or body, then that decision by someone who wants it to be called in, whether it's the client or the representative, would wouldn't be so easy, and I think it's important that it doesn't land on one person's shoulders. It's open to abuse, that system.
I don't mind that it's one person making the decision. The problem is the structure is it's called in because it is allegedly strategic, and the officer's report is designed to confirm that, and that's why they never advocate refusal. So
it just really go either way.
Your stuff.
If it's one person, I think it needs to be a more judicial process. If it's going to remain with the current process, it probably should be a more committee-style decision-making. I think you can make a very reasonable case to go either way, but I think we're stuck rather unhappily in the middle at the moment.
I think there's...
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it that we don't know what the officer recommendations are and whether the mayor is going by the officer recommendation or against officer recommendation?
Yes,
they're made public.
They're public,
very full reports.
They're all for approval. Those officers.
That one is 100%, I think.
Yes.
Those officers' reports. Those officers' reports don't indicate why the borough is wrong in its decision. They seem to be saying that we find no problem against planning policies with this proposal before us.
And I think this is going beyond the remit of your question, but I'm going to say it anyway. Nikki's heard me say this before, so I apologise. But that does open up an importantly linked wider point, which is when you have a London plan that is that thick, you can actually find inside this document really the evidence to make almost any conclusion you want. And I speak as someone who's lobbied several bits into this and know full well that there are other bits and other pages that flatly contradict the bits I got in. So, no criticism against the people who do that, but you can use this to say almost anything, and that is happening.
But that's the nature of planning, and I think that it's important to be flexible in that regard. But what we've found, and I'm sure it's the case in every calling, is that you would expect the rigour of the officials here to be at least, if not greater than, that happened in the local authorities. And in our case, there were two local authorities dealing with the same site. And I could foresee, as I said, I don't necessarily approve of callings, but I could foresee a situation where maybe the community didn't have trust in what the local authority was doing and was perhaps relieved that it went to the GLA, where it would be assessed with a more rigorous process. In our case, it was clearly, you would hope, if it is the higher authority. In our case, it couldn't have been more opposite than that. There was absolutely no rigour at all in the way that the officials here assessed that application. I pity them, because I think if you go into that profession, you want to do the best job you can, but they were clearly rubber stamping something which I would have thought probably stepped over the ethics of their
The
profession.
question I'd like to raise is that at that decision-making level, should the borough be brought back into play, say from their planning justifications, from their appraisal, whether they agree?
They get 5 minutes.
Are they brought in?
They give evidence
to give their.
It's very
Well,
limited.
5 minutes for a major application is rather difficult. But I think if you're looking for concluding remarks here, I actually think that the track record and the impact on communities is really damaging communities' confidence in the planning system.
Absolutely.
It's building upon the feeling that what's the point in getting involved in preparing a local plan? We say to our members, contribute to the local plan if it contains all the site allocations you want to be defined in terms of what will happen on them. You wouldn't need neighbourhood planning underneath them because it would be fully comprehensive. And they say, what's the point when the borough makes a decision and the mayor overrules it? It's a decision that we approve of absolutely because it was based on planning policy.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's...
One question.
Yes,
are you going to ask local authorities who've been overruled what they feel about it and whether they learnt anything from it?
We are now.
Yeah, that's effective.
Yes. By the way, I just want to put something right, because I said it earlier. It's we've checked up now on what I was saying, and the protocol for site visits that I was citing was the local authority one, not the mayor's one. And the mayor's one actually allows for the applicants to be there, but not for the community. However, I think the mayor this mayor, Sadiq Khan, has actually allowed communities sometimes to be at site visits.
Yeah.
So,
Yes,
but what we need is obviously, I don't, you know, lots.
The officers did not inform us that we could apply, and they didn't tell us when it was going to be, and people might have liked to be there. I mean, maybe they just...
Yeah, but it's not in the protocol anyway,
Well,
so
that
they
should
didn't have to.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is, that's a 2016 protocol.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean, whatever happens, we need to look at that again.
I mean, they just don't think we're house trained.
I didn't know you were either, but still. May I thank you to our guests for all your contributions. We've just got a few more formal items to get through, but you're welcome to stay. But I'm very grateful for the contributions you've made today. Finally, can I ask the committee to note the action taken under delegated authority to agree the areas of consideration as set out in paragraph 4.4 of the report, and to hold an informal briefing of the Mayor's planning decision powers?
Noted.
Can I also ask the committee to note the report and discussion and agree to delegate to me as chair, in consultation with the deputy chair, to agree any output from the discussion?
Agreed.
Item 9, can I ask the committee to note the work programme report?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Noted.
And item 10 is the date of the next meeting, which is the 18th of September 2019 at 2 p.m. Is that noted by everyone?
Noted.
And finally, any other business the chair considers urgent? Well, there is actually one item that I consider urgent, and that is that this is Paul Watling's last planning committee for the London Assembly. He just whispered in my ear, and he reckons this is his 150th. And I don't know what to say to that, apart from
How sad.
whether or not that's you said it in that sort of victim voice. So I just want to extend the thanks of not just the planning committee, but all the planning members who used to sit on the committee as well in previous years, for the diligence and the authority that you've given to us, the knowledge that you've has been absolutely vital to us. And I must say, in all my dealings with you, it's been an extraordinarily pleasant experience. So I'd just like to, as I say, formally record this committee's and all previous committees' thanks for all your fantastic work. Thank you very much.
I'd like to echo and endorse that. From the point of view of people who are involved with the Assembly committees, his work has been exemplary. It's been so engaging. It's been something you would like on every committee as outreach as well as support to yourselves.
I didn't pay you to say that, did I?
And may I say,
That's great. Paul's been
London's-
here.
yeah.
Paul's been, he's been an officer here, serving the planning committee since I asked him. He said 1852, but I actually think it's 2001, and that's a long time. And I've been here just a little bit longer than that, so I can say that Paul's done so much to research and shape the work of this committee, and of course through that, I think we can claim that we actually have, as a committee, I wasn't on it all the time, but because I was working with the first mayor, but I think that this committee has really, through Paul's research and shaping of our work, has actually helped us to make some really good recommendations to the mayor, which have been taken up, and to hold the mayor to account. So thank you so much, Paul.
and the final statement is that London's loss is Madrid's gain, as I understand. So I look forward to seeing how Madrid improves as a result of your. And with that, I call an end to the meeting, there being no other urgent items of business.
Thank you.